This is Let's Talk Radical Radio, getting to the root causes of the important issues of the day. This on-the-air community forum believes your voice matters and welcomes all thoughts and views without judgment. Please join today's conversation by calling 415-663-8492, or you can tweet us at Let's Talk on KWMR.
That's right. I have the tweet box in front of me. Your hosts today are Robin Carpenter leading our conversation, Mary Frank answering the phones, and I'm Paul Raffel.
And when you call in and hear the phone ringing, please hang on. When you hear me say you're on the air, please give us your give us your first name, and then turn down your radio, and please watch your language.
And today we're talking about how the mainstream media was fiddling as Louisiana drowned in the big flooding that covered a third of the state of Louisiana. And we're asking why mainstream media wasn't covering it. Why didn't President Obama make a statement? Why was it pretty much absent while we talked about Donald Trump's hair again, while a third of one of our largest states in the Union was underwater? Was it because it's the South and the South doesn't matter? Was it because we don't want people to know about the devastating effects of climate change? So these are the questions we're asking, and we'd like for you to join our conversation by calling us on 415-663-8492. And let's see here. So we just wanted to talk about, with these Louisiana floods, which the American Red Cross immediately labeled as the worst natural disaster to strike the United States since Superstorm Sandy, it didn't dominate cable news, mainstream media, or the front pages of any newspapers. At the time, President Obama, other than signing a disaster declaration, did not bother to interrupt his Martha Vineyard's vacation of golf and fundraisers to address the suffering residents of the Gulf. And we're not talking about he needed to stop his vacation and come back. He could have gone on television for 5 minutes and said, we want to acknowledge and send our thoughts and prayers to the people of Louisiana. And I want to remind you that this is what climate change looks like. Obama had an amazing ability to use this as a way to wake us up to the fact that this is climate change. This is what you get with climate change. And this would have been an excellent opportunity for Obama to talk about a hybrid storm never seen before of this nature happening, and also to express that the United States of America cared that a third of one of our most beloved states was underwater. So it was, people go like, oh, well, Obama, they didn't want him there. I'm not talking about him being physically there.
Actually being present.
I'm talking about just being present and saying, we notice you. I mean, I have so many friends that live in that area. Annie and I were just there in May for a month, and in Acadiana and in Lafayette and Beau Bridge and Baton Rouge. And these are wonderful people. And to have the only thing that you could find out was through Facebook and social media. Right. No one even knew. People were being warned that way.
Of course, I don't actually watch TV, so I don't know what the mainstream media was covering, but I didn't even see it really on Facebook or on the web so much.
The only way I saw it on Facebook,
the Olympics,
I saw it on Facebook because I have friends there. Yeah. So I'm seeing their posts, and then we're sharing, and we're checking in with family. And so what amazed me, as I've said before on this show, I've been trying every night to watch, and I'll record them so I can quickly watch and time them, MSNBC, CNN, and Fox. And once again, even last night, it was 47 minutes of Trump and how he was 47 minutes talking about how Trump was reading a teleprompter and staying on message was the big news. Hillary Clinton and the Clinton Foundation was just damned by several organizations for over 50% of her contacts were with Clinton Foundation donors, right. Which, whether you're right or left, that's kind of a big story. And there was like a second on the tornadoes in Indiana. So during the flooding, I was doing the same thing. And literally night after night, there was barely a mention. The only place there was a mention was on like ABC, NBC, and CBS News. And they would mention it for like a minute.
Right. And then go back to Trump.
And then go back to Trump. I mean, those three networks for their 30-minute national news segment, they do, because they only have, they have like 20 minutes of the 30 minutes. Right. So they do kind of quickly move from thing to thing. But to me, I could not believe,
why wasn't it the top story?
I think I have some insight into this.
Yeah.
If you realize, Robin, and we certainly, having been in media, realize that the ratings have gone down everywhere because the competition is so much stiffer. And so ratings mean income, because the higher the ratings, the more they can charge for their advertisers. Trump is so good for business.
Mary, you had
let me finish
floating
my
coffins. You had some of the best horrible visuals ever.
That doesn't make any difference. The Trump, they know, brings in the numbers. And when you see that, that determines, it's like the news
but actually,
mantra is if it bleeds, it leads.
Right.
And you would think that this was something that if it bleeds, it leads. But the phenomenon of Trump and the media ratings, remember, the media gave Trump over $1 billion in free publicity, and they did not do that out of the goodness of their heart.
I know.
They did it because it was
but
good for
Trump
business.
ratings are starting to drop, and polls are showing people are sick of hearing about Trump. The Trump supporters support him. The rest of us don't care if he's on teleprompter or not. I mean, it just goes on and on and on, and CNN ratings have been dropping. The only ratings that aren't dropping are Fox, and Fox is the one network that showed most about the flooding in Louisiana.
I still think it's a factor.
Well,
I still think it's a huge
Well, what
factor.
I'm saying is, yes, it's been a factor.
I'm not saying
but,
it's right. I'm saying it's a factor.
But ratings don't prove out that. So the ratings are dropping. People have Trump fatigue. And
you're talking personally. If you look at the numbers and you look at the numbers on television, you'll see it's not dropping enough to make a difference.
Well, it's dropping, and they're getting feedback that there's Trump fatigue on the networks, and the networks that are doing better are the ones that, like Fox. Fox actually, sadly, I'm showing my prejudice because I am a liberal, but Fox, because Fox is so attuned to blood in the water and what gets attention, and I mean, you couldn't have had better, more morbid, horrifying images than what was coming out of Louisiana. People going to their family graveyards, trying to literally roping. A friend of mine did a video roping coffins and trying to make sure the bones and stuff were in there and dragging them. I mean, so to me, I think it's more than just Trump gets better ratings than the biggest storm ever in history. I think that, and there is this element of Trump fatigue. I really believe that we have had, and actually the numbers were changed. I checked in on this. They were saying since May of 2015, but since May of 2015, so in 16 months, we have had 8 flood incidents in the United States that are considered 500 or 1,000 year storms in 16 months, and devastating flooding. And the only flooding, that we've really seen anything about is Sandy. But these were storms that were flooding storms. We're not even talking traditional hurricanes and traditional tornadoes. So we're seeing these hybrid storms.
Well, there's another factor, and that the oil owns Louisiana, as you were saying, and maybe they don't want that attention drawn to climate change. Whereas with the other storm involved media centers. So, of course, that got a lot of attention.
I think Sandy got coverage because it hit the heart.
It was
hit,
right there.
It hit, it hit the banking center of America and the media centers of America. So it did get coverage.
So in the Fox coverage, I didn't see it, of course, were they using it to blame Obama or to raise fears about FEMA or something like that?
No, it was still pretty much instead of 47 minutes of Trump, it was 32 and 3 minutes of Louisiana. So it was still just little bits and pieces, but I mean, it's a bigger flood. 300,000 people were rescued.
Wow.
300,000 people. And they were not rescued by the American government. They were rescued by the Cajun Navy. And as Paul pointed out, we're now the Cajun Army because they're on dry land. And this also happened during Katrina, where what happened was everybody got out in their boats and started rescuing people. The federal government tried to stop non-governmental officials. So sheriffs and other people got out there and deputized everyone that was breathing and said, you're deputized now, get out there in your boats. And, that's the other thing that I think is happening across the country. We even saw that with the Clear Lake fires, that the Red Cross and the federal government and FEMA are highly ineffective, and they actually try to block locals from taking care of each other. And and one of the things I have to say about Cajun country and where I grew up, and everybody's very self-sufficient and community, or we don't ever wait on the feds to show up.
It's still part of rural life, is that you
Yes.
look after each other in times of crisis, because you never know when it's going to be you that needs help, and it's just what you do when you have neighbors.
Who care?
Yeah.
One of the most stunning images, it was on Facebook, as you say, Robin, where I thought so much of it was along the coast, and as you say, no, it wasn't the coast. It would be like if there was mass flooding from here to Concord.
Or no, not even here.
No?
Inland. It was up. It's up north where Baton Rouge. It's the center of the state of Louisiana, and it was a really weird storm because my dad said we're having a really weird weather pattern. Daddy and I were talking on the phone that day. And then Andy pulled it up because we like to pull up, like, looking at satellite view. And Andy goes, yeah, it's a really weird storm. And it's, it's going from the south to the west. Then I go, no, Andy, you got your computer upside down. It does not, storms don't go that way.
Right.
And he goes, no, it is. And then it's curling around. I go, like, give me that. Thinking, oh, that Yankee, he does not know anything about storms coming in the south. And he was right. And I went, I've never in my whole life seen anything like that.
Right.
And so it really was, it deluged. It was almost like having a hurricane develop in the middle of land. It was
odd.
It was a hybrid storm.
So this is Let's Talk Radio, call-in radio, with hosts Robin Carpenter, Mary Frank, and I'm Paul Raffel. Please call us on 415-663-8492 and give us your opinions about why the coverage was not more present on this terrible, terrible catastrophe in Louisiana. You can also tweet us at Let's Talk on KWMR with your thoughts and opinions.
And it's interesting because, Paul, you brought this up last week when I was very whooped up about it and about Southern phobia or prejudice against the South.
Yeah.
And, one of the things that one of the reporters, James Brazel, was saying, the extreme weather events predicted for decades by climate change scientists have been on constant parade in the southern United States all year. When are we going to be ready to say this is climate change? So it's, one of the things is,
Wait, who said that?
This was a reporter talking about what was going on in regards to the South. And, climate change, this is another article, climate change is never going to announce itself by name like, hi, I'm climate change storm number 7. But this is what we should expect it to look like. That we are seeing it. And oddly enough, a lot of it is happening in the southern United States.
And this is just the beginning.
But very, very, very little coverage. I mean, when you're having 501, they actually are saying now that this was probably a 1,000-year storm. When you're having
of course, they have to happen sometime.
Yeah, sometime. Yeah.
So maybe for another 1,000 years it won't happen again.
No,
maybe.
right. Till next week.
Or maybe till next year. Yeah, right.
Yes, but when you've had 8 of those,
Right.
in 16 months,
Right.
and what's also ironic, first of all, I think the lack of media coverage, what we've seen with mainstream media is just so awful lately anyway. We've had to depend on the internet. But even the internet, as you were saying, Paul, the only place I was seeing it was through
Your friends.
Well, and I also subscribe to the New Orleans Times-Picayune, so I get their feeds, and so I was getting some of those feeds as well. But they had to get on up in there because it was really happening way north in Acadiana, which really that's what we call the Plains Cajuns or Inland Cajuns, and and it's just never happened. And it happened also so fast because it wasn't about rivers rising. It was about a massive deluge, like biblical proportions.
Noah.
It was the houses just started because everybody figures a heavy rain comes. This is how we were trained growing up.
The rivers flow.
And the heavy rain starts, and you have a couple of hours to get out. These people, the rain started, and the water just started rising. Right, it was like being in a bathtub, and so. All of this is so, first of all, Mary, as you were talking about, media likes a story, show you a puppy, show you a dead body, show you a shooting, show you a kitten. And, this was a story that was so full of, could have been so big and huge and full about. I mean, I can remember when the media would cover a story about 7 coal miners trapped in a mine, somewhere, and it stays on CNN for 24/7 until they come out. And this was 300,000 people.
Well, of course, the Olympics was on at the time, right?
But that was only being covered by MSNBC. They aired
terrible coverage anyway.
Yeah,
And
but still, when they were.
but it's the Trump factor. It's the presidential race. It's
and I
all
also
that
think
other
it's
stuff.
I think it's cover up climate change.
I do too. I think that's a huge factor. Think about who owns the media right now.
3 people,
well,
basically.
3 people, not, but almost.
Yeah, 3 corporations.
And they are all, or most of them, Trump supporters, and completely not admitting what's going on by releasing information, and a lot of information on a storm like this. This is going to stir up some thought.
Yeah, and I think that, it's interesting because a lot of people were sort of having schadenfreude about one of the guys who voted against disaster relief for Hurricane Sandy is now wanting federal disaster relief.
Said it
in
was
his
an
house.
act of God against gays
no, this
or
is
something.
another guy. No,
that was amazing.
No, this is another guy. So, one person voted against disaster relief for Sandy and his house is flooded. Another person had said that I believe it was Sandy or one of them, whatever. Oh, Katrina destroyed New Orleans, or Katrina didn't. It was the federal government and bad levees. But that, that was because of it's like Sodom and Gomorrah there.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
now, and his house was flooded out. So, what is going to happen? And the regular folks, just the regular folks living there, there are these weirdos like that. They, we can't stigmatize the whole South by those few people, which, of course, as Mary was pointing out, the media is going to grab a hold of those guys. They're not going to grab a hold of my friends that have a fishing business or my friends that run a ranch or, and they just live there, or all the professors and students at LSU, These are good people. They're Americans. But, Louisiana is one of the most resource-rich states in the United States. We get so many resources from there. It is primarily owned by oil and gas, but it's a very beautiful, rich place. And a third of it drowned, basically,
Yeah.
And that's just huge.
Yeah, what if the Sacramento Valley became a lake again as it used to be before we drained it all out? Frederick Smith wrote in email. He said, "It's truly amazing how bad the coverage was. I regularly read the news online, and 2 days after the floods decided to do my own search because someone had mentioned some flooding in Louisiana. I couldn't believe what I'd missed. This should have been at the beginning of my news feed." So even online, even on Google News, it wasn't the top story. It was, as you say, it was Trump's hair or Trump's latest lies.
And it was interesting because you didn't even, the only place I was seeing it was on Facebook. And
yeah, me too.
Even the New Orleans Times Picker Unit took them a little bit to kind of grab in there and get up there. I didn't feel like NOLA was doing the best job either, but it was the only place. But that's local news coverage. That's not national news coverage. And I think that, what was also the one advantage I sort of saw to this was when you're getting the national coverage, then you suddenly do have we've got to make the National Guard look good. We've got to make the Red Cross look good. When you're not getting media attention on you, it means less resources come to you right away.
Right.
But on the other hand, the kind of resources that have been being sent by the American government have usually gotten in the way. So in a sense, letting all the locals take care of themselves and each other and knew what to do, because one of my friends did a feed where it was one of these giant National Guard trucks where the tires are 12 feet high coming in that had water and meals ready to eat, dry provisions to try to get into the neighborhoods.
They couldn't fit in?
It couldn't fit in because it was too big. So they just stationed, if you leave people alone and get the politicians out of it, they just stationed at the beginning of certain areas, and all the boats, they told the Cajun Navy, come up and we'll supply your boats. We're gonna be in set locations, and then you guys go in.
Right.
And, so in some ways, that's a blessing not to have. I just remember in Katrina the power struggles about FEMA and the National Guard, and we finally got General Honore, thank God, in there who knew how to first thing, they were having soldiers with training guns on people and stuff. He's going these are American citizens. They are your brothers and sisters in trouble. Put those damn guns down,
Right.
So
they call it looting when actually they're just trying to
to survive,
right.
But so I think that, it was really interesting because one of the places that Andy and I really loved, and I was hoping they'd be able to call in today, but this is right in the middle of their lunch hour rush. It's called oddly enough, bread and circus provisions, because part of what Paul and I and Mary and I have talked about is I feel like the media is trying to give us bread and circus so we don't realize, climate change is happening and the planet is in trouble. But they actually, there was a wedding that they were supposed to be catering on the Saturday where the flooding was the worst. And almost everyone working there, their houses were flooded. So they got into boats and got as much food. Fortunately, the location where they were didn't flood, and went and did a makeshift wedding and went out and found the guests and picked people up in boats. And they didn't get to have the crystal and the china or whatever, but they're going, we're Cajuns. We're not going to let some stupid 1,000-year storm ruin a party. And so I just loved that story of what they did. And then they hooked up other places that did not have that did not flood. There was this service, like a service will go pick up takeout food for you from restaurants and deliver. And so they got together with those guys, and they got guys in boats, and they did their own chain of like who would put together, box lunches and stuff like that. And the meal people got a hold of other people with fishing boats. And so there were a lot of really, wonderful stories of people taking care of each other. And but
disasters bring out the best in people sometimes.
Well, I think that all those fishermen who jumped in before anybody could do anything, they're the real heroes. I mean, the stories that are coming out, the little personal stories, man, it's remarkable. And a lot of people would have died if they hadn't been there.
Oh, yeah. And one thing that did happen that made people very aware after the levees broke after Katrina was the fact that as the waters rise really fast, if you don't have an axe or a way to get to your roof, people drown in their attics or they drown on the top floor of their homes because they're trapped. They can't, so most people keep... I mean, I remember my dad always did. He had an axe in the attic, And so that was another thing people are aware. But you don't expect that kind of flooding that fast without some little bit of warning. But also back home, almost everybody has a boat, even if it's just a flat bottom John boat with a trolling motor. You have, because I can remember when we would have flooding in downtown Mobile, which is very low lying, we used to get out in our canoes and canoe around. But and the other thing about Mary, when we're talking about media visuals, not only do you have coffins, you have people grabbing their family members' coffins, trying to stuff their bones back in, tie it up, and alligators are in the water with them. And we're like, that's dedication. I'd be like, Mama, I'm sorry, you're floating. You always love nature, and I'm not going to fight an alligator for your bones. But so it's interesting that there wasn't more coverage because there's so many inspiring stories, right? I mean, everything you're talking about, and the little doggies being saved. I did love what was
prime fodder for prime time, really.
The one video that went viral was of the three guys, and the young guy jumps in the water. The woman's in the car that's kind of a convertible, and they slash the top and pull her out. It's almost like giving birth. They yank her out. You see him yanking an arm out.
Is she the one that went back for her dog?
No. She started yelling. They had to edit it because she was yelling at him. You get your over there. You get my dog. And he's like, I can't get the dog. She's going, and she shoved him like, get down there and get my dog.
She got the dog.
But so that was like, this great rescue story. But the actual backstory of it is the woman was a well-known drunk. And she was drunk as a skunk, and she kept trying to drive into that area that was flooded, and people kept trying to stop her, and she just drove right in anyway. And so it was really interesting because the backstory is the poor guy almost killed himself trying to get the town drunk and her dog out of the car. But I thought, back home we're not prejudiced. Everybody has their quirks and has their gifts, and hers is keeping everybody on their toes and irritating them. But anyway, so it was interesting too because, like I said, knowing people back there, getting these backstories.
And how do your friends back there feel about it all? Are they complaining about the lack of attention, or are they preferring it?
I think their feeling is that much of the South is not considered important, and their feeling is like mainstream media tends to be liberal, and they don't care about America except for the cities. We care about Washington and New York, the coast, but we didn't care about. Well, we did cover Katrina, but maybe because it was slow news.
Well, it was such a spectacle, wasn't it?
But this was even more of a spectacle, you know.
Yeah,
But it wasn't an
I don't
election
know.
year.
And
Yeah. But also, you know,
it's not just the black
Now,
folks either. I mean, that was
Yeah.
part of the coverage
Now,
of Katrina
see,
was showing, look at these people, they're just,
What's
terrible,
interesting, you would
awful.
think you would have more coverage of white people, considering that this was, you
Yeah,
know.
but they're not trying to say something. It's not the racism.
No,
that-
and
about
there you
white
could
people.
say, because I did think about that, was Katrina covered more, and was there more intensive scrutiny because of Bush being a Republican and because the media tended to be liberal? You know, was there more coverage because of that? I don't know. I mean, also another thing, if you try to remove sort of political biases, which of course all three of us have our own, is that the storm wasn't named. And so you have to have appropriate branding of your disaster. And if your disaster doesn't have, I don't know if you've noticed they've started naming the storms in the Midwest from the polar vortex. So, you know, if going back to, as Mary was saying,
But it wasn't a tropical
advertising,
storm. It wasn't a hurricane. It was.
it was a hybrid storm. But maybe we're going to need to start naming storms.
Yeah, to get the attention it needs. Okay, this is KWMR Community Radio for West Marin, 90.5 in Point Reyes Station, 89.9 in Bolinas, 92.3 in the San Geronimo Valley, and streaming live on KWMR. And we'd like to thank a couple more of our underwriters. The Audubon Canyon Ranch, KWMR is supported by Audubon Canyon Ranch, environmental educators for more than 50 years. Docents at the Marin Griffin Preserve in Stinson Beach receive natural history training and teach 4th and 5th graders from all over the Bay Area. Docent training begins September 7th. Information at 415-868-9244 or online at egret.org. That's egret.org. And we'd also like to thank To Celebrate Life. To Celebrate Life, Breast Cancer Foundation is presenting their 21st annual gala fundraiser, Stepping into the Future, on Saturday, September 24th at Marin Center Exhibit Hall in San Rafael. The foundation supports Bay Area nonprofits providing direct services to underserved women and men living with breast cancer. Information and tickets available to celebratelife.org. And you've been listening to Let's Talk Radio with co-hosts Robin Carpenter, Mary Frank, and
I'm Paul Raffel.
and I'm Paul Raffel. Oopsie.
Call in, won't you? 415-663-8492 or tweet us at Let's Talk on KWMR. I have my tweet box. It's
do you
right
have
in
your
front of me.
tweet box? I was hoping there's a reporter back there I was trying to get a hold of to call in, but I think she's out on the beat. And what we were really talking about is this, 500 to 1,000-year storm in Louisiana, how it got virtually no coverage for days by mainstream media, cable media, broadcast media, even on the internet. There were very few stories. And I think also a lot of people on the ground there, other than quick post to Facebook, nobody was having time to get in there and do deep coverage. And also, when you're trying to cover something like that, the spread literally
how
covered
do you get in?
a third of the state. Can you imagine from here all the way up to the Oregon coast and inland being underwater, a third of your state? One of the things that we talked about, too, was the fact that because the storm wasn't named, does a storm need branding? And there was a really good article in the Washington Post by Jeff Halverson, and he talks about how an oddball nameless storm unleashed a disastrous deluge in Louisiana. And he wanted to talk a little about this. See, to me, also, I can't believe that weather people and meteorologists weren't all over this because it's one of these new hybrid storms that we're going to be seeing. And he said that, combining a sopping wet air mass and record-setting humidity levels in the air and a peculiar type of cyclonic storm running against the grain of the mid-latitude westerly air current, you got a rogue vortex operating in a near-infinite water supply, creating both hell and high water for thousands of people. So actually what happened was it formed basically a hurricane over land because the humidity levels were so high. A hurricane usually has to be over water to pull its energy. It was just sucking it out of the air. And then as it started to vortex, then the westerly air currents it was trying to move west, and then they were pushing in. It just created this perfect storm.
He's saying it was a cyclone, not an anticyclone. So
in the context of this show today, I'm wondering more and more, Robin. I would like to know how you feel about it. I think the fact that the oil companies are very nervous about climate change and maybe having to change their act completely in order for the planet to survive. I wonder how much effect do you think that had? We've just mentioned
I think it had some, but if you don't mind, I just want to finish a little bit about the storm.
Oh, I thought you were done.
Oh, okay. Just that, so what he was saying is cyclonic vortexes, which is some of us just call them storms. They're the bread and butter weather makers in both the tropics and middle latitudes, which the United States is, middle latitudes. And at one end of the spectrum are cyclones like hurricanes fed by the warm ocean waters. On the other end are the deep, cold core extropical cyclones of the mid-latitudes, like when we had the Hurricane Huron, which is a hurricane-like vortex forming over a Great Lake in 1996, and the polar cyclones that were getting Arctic hurricanes. Sandy was considered a hybrid storm when it made landfall. So we're getting these hybrid systems because of shifts in the jet stream, shifts in humidity levels because of heat, and all of that. So I think meteorologically, if I'm saying that right, this is a huge story, and I can't believe our meteorologists weren't. I don't think I'm saying that right. Anyway, the weathermen and women are not.
Well, what about the Weather
that.
Channel? Well, it must have been big news on the Weather Channel, huh?
No, they're not covering it.
Well, they did. No, the Weather Channel did.
You would think they would be doing updates, which they usually do. Wasn't there for the last several days.
Well, now that the floodwaters have gone down,
is that it?
So the Weather Channel covers current weather, and then as the flood starts to subside, there was a little coverage, but not much. I mean, I don't think very few people have really gotten the whole story: how the storm formed, what happened, why the deluge, I mean, hopefully, the Atlantic Monthly did a pretty good story as well about that. But, no one has told, the whole story. This happened, which you could do in 5 minutes, on a news show. Here's what happened. Here's a map. Here, look at this third of the state. I think people should want to understand how we're going to be having stranger and stranger weather. And to Mary's point, I do think that, so much of gas and oil and fracking is happening in the southern states, in the Midwest, places where, the media doesn't really, frankly, care that much about those people. We really are. I think our media is focused more on urban areas and coastal states, places where the power brokers are, East and West Coast. And I think that, they don't want people to really start to get worried about climate change. We still have a lot of our senators and Congress folks that are saying it doesn't exist. I mean, you're not even allowed to say it in Florida,
including the owners of the Weather Channel.
What?
Oh.
Very
they're not allowed to say it?
No, who are really suppressing that. Oh, look, they don't talk about weather change. They don't talk about climate change. They talk about the events. Have you ever heard them talk about climate change?
No, they talk.
Never.
But Weather Channel, just in their defense, their thing is just to cover current weather happenings. They've never been there to they don't go into political or they go into the globe is changing. They just
then why didn't they cover Louisiana?
They did cover the storm coming in.
Not much.
The way the Weather Channel works is I don't rely on they're more like a CB radio or something. They're just going to storm coming in, barometric pressures at 29.5, lowest in recorded history, blah, blah, blah. So that's always the way they've reported. So and that was the only news we were getting from mainstream news was the Weather Channel during that.
But it was very limited.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, a big weather phenomenon like that. Although, see, the coverage, the oil rig disaster down there on the
BP
Gulf
oil
Coast,
spill. That was very quiet for days.
But that got good coverage because it's right there. It's one thing. It's a big fire, lots of smoke, great pictures. Whereas, how do you cover a flood? I don't know.
But the BP spill was not. It was very quiet for several days.
Was it?
Yeah. It was. The coverage had to build on that. And, I think
they had
that
to figure out how much trouble they're in.
Exactly.
Right.
And a lot of the coverage died out pretty quickly as far as what was going on with the core exit spraying. And, some of the information there was very muffled as far as what was going on and covering what people were doing back there, because there were no baffles put out. There was nothing. People were creating their own ways to stop it coming into sloughs and stuff like that. Once again, the Cajun Gulf Coast Navy, people were out there in their own boats creating their own blockages. So, I think that when they're just going to reach a point at which every area who's lived through these strange types of storms, they're waking up. They're waking up and they're going to say, wait a minute. And like I was saying in Florida, where they're not even allowed to say in their own state house, the words climate change have been outlawed to say. I mean, I watched a county supervisors meeting. I think it was for Pinellas County, and the person was trying to talk about, they were trying to have some ideas about how to protect against possible higher water. And the guy, the scientist, the report, and the engineer, they kept laughing because they were trying to say rising waters and climate. Half of the stuff, they weren't allowed to say it. And finally, even the supervisors were laughing, going, this is ridiculous. We can't have an intelligent discussion. We're trying to put some things in place, taking this into account. So it's, I don't know. We don't have, and what was disturbing is usually you get more internet media coverage, and the people, we're the ones that bring the coverage to life, not mainstream media. And I think that's where Southern phobia maybe kicks in, because so many of the people on the internet that are really, doing alternative media, they're very liberal. And does alternative media feel it's important to cover Louisiana as we feel it's important to cover GMOs or other issues like that? So is there a problem that in alternative media, in areas that are not very liberal areas, they're probably not alternative media people situated in those areas. So does that make it, more difficult too, that in those areas you don't have as much?
Right.
I don't know.
I don't know how would you, if your house is flooded, I'm guessing the Wi-Fi is down.
Exactly.
But no, the Cajun Army and the Cajun Navy, there's a website for Cajun Army, and they're, of course, accepting donations and want people to sign up as volunteers. TheCajunArmy.com is the website. And it's a great site, and it's got all kinds of stories from people writing in.
And these are the real heroes here, too.
On Facebook here. It's actually lovely. They are the real heroes, and they're just doing it just because that's...
Because you take care of each other.
Because you take care of each other. And
Also,
that was
people,
supposed to be.
there were videos being put out right away by contractors.
Uh-oh. It's got a frog in here through it.
A Louisiana frog. They were putting out videos of when you get back into your house, the steps you've got to take right away about ripping out the sheetrock and what to do, what not to do, of how to try to work on your houses and how, get the neighbors to haul the sheetrock out with each other, and so putting together plans right away of what you can keep and don't keep.
So now
isn't it very likely, though, that now we see the pattern starting to emerge? Like the flooding keeping coming back at the same place. It's kind of a concern.
But this is not a floodplain or a flood zone. But
whatever you called it, because the climate conditions were perfect for the storm hurricane.
But that was very unusual. It's never been that way.
Well, it used to be unusual.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying, there's always been this issue about why does the federal government pay for all of this flood insurance along the coastlines, right? And why should we be paying for people to live in flood zones? So one of the things about this area is these were not flood zones. These were not, there were some areas I'm sure that were right by creeks that were probably considered in a flood zone. These were places that we would have never, would we ever think of, Cedarville flooding or, somewhere that, this was not a place. So only 20% of people had flood insurance because they weren't living in a flood zone.
Sure.
So
Baton Rouge, was the city itself inundated? Yeah.
Yes.
And is Baton Rouge what would you classify it, a wealthy city?
I think it's a very thriving city. It's the home to Louisiana State
capital?
University. No, I'm trying to remember now.
Oh,
I don't think
was it hard, very hard, Robin?
Yes, Baton Rouge and Lafayette.
Completely, like the other places?
Yeah, and Baton Rouge is right in the heart.
Well, like the whole town was underwater?
I don't know.
Or most of it?
Most of it. It happened more in the suburbs.
county.
In the, wherever the land was slightly lower and where you were closer to rivers.
So I wonder how many of these thousands of people are going to be able to go back, if they'll be able to. I mean, they're going to get assistance, money from the feds, I guess, from FEMA to rebuild, but I wonder how many. Anyway.
Yeah, so Baton Rouge is the capital of Louisiana because I just remembered the governor, John Bell Edwards, had to evacuate because the governor's mansion flooded. So
I bet they're going to fix that one up.
yeah.
This is KWMR's weekly Let's Talk call-in show with co-hosts Robin Carpenter, Mary Frank, and I am Paul Raffaele.
I thought I was.
To join the conversation, just call us on 415-663-8492. We still have a few minutes left, so call us.
Yeah, I mean, there are hundreds of thousands of people that were displaced from their homes.
Right.
So, and with flood damage like that, I mean, the horror of the levees breaking after Katrina was people weren't allowed back in for weeks. So by the time they got back in, you may as well have just razed the house to the ground. These people are getting right back in. Right, there's nobody stopping them. They're getting right back in. And trying to do the things that you need to do right away to minimize, mold and mold damage. A friend of mine, her brother is an international mold remediation specialist.
Right.
And he gets called in on huge projects, and he says climate change is the best thing that ever happened to his
the mold business. So speaking of Katrina, there's a great little article that was in Alternet about Katrina now. It was 11 years ago. Despite receiving $76 billion in assistance after Katrina, the poor people of New Orleans got very little of that help.
And a lot of them are still homeless.
Yeah, a lot of them are.
Most of them didn't return.
Right.
In the Ninth Ward in New Orleans, where so many of the African-American community lived and had lived there for generations, there was something like 85% home ownership, which is one of the highest home ownership rates in the United States of African-Americans in a community. And they say that people really didn't want them to come back.
Okay, we have a caller. We have two callers. Okay, hold on one second. Caller, you're on the air. What's your name, please?
Hello, it's Sally.
Hi, Sally.
Hi, Sally.
Hello, Paul and Mary, but not sure which one is which. And Robin.
I believe I'm
Hi.
Paul today, Sally. You'll be surprised when I come home today.
I know. It'll be so fun. I have been, I've been thinking a lot about this since the flooding occurred, and there are so many facets to this whole story and this whole occurrence. But comparing it to what happened to New Orleans, they're different things that happened, but the times were pretty different if you think about it. New Orleans, Hurricane Katrina came, and there was not an election year, if I'm not incorrect there.
That's right. 2000. When was it?
2005.
Yeah, that's right.
So, and New Orleans lives very high symbolically in our country. The iconography, the history, what it symbolizes, and how beloved it is for being the birthplace of jazz, and Baton Rouge and Cajun,
Cajun land,
country.
Cajun.
I mean, equally interesting, but not as high in the public consciousness. Cajun country is, of course, where we all want to go to the festivals, to the music festivals, and but New Orleans has a different. It's more like New York City, or it's just got something to it. And also now, all that we're hearing is the election information. This is all we're hearing about is about the election. Mm-hmm. The other thing is that 11 years ago, we weren't yet inundated with all the other natural disasters that are completely constant. So this poor poor beleaguered Louisiana this time round has gotten buried because of the fact that there's, we just had an earthquake there in Italy within proximity of Rome. And, of course, the first thing they said was 100 miles from Rome before you even get to, well, wait a minute, which town did this actually really hit?
And the town was completely leveled, yeah.
It's really all about what's the most famous town, and it's also just that I think everyone is numbed to catastrophic climate-driven events. That's just my opinion. It's just everyone's just like, huh? I mean, maybe we literally can't handle it in our consciousness, combined with the apparent catastrophe that is our current political situation.
That makes sense, Sally, because when we were talking about there have been 8 500 to 1,000 year floods in 16 months in America, that it does sort of become, okay, we now know what rooftops underwater look like, but although this did add coffins, which was and alligators, that's a plus. But that we are getting so. I mean, when I was looking at it, I confess I'm looking like, these are great pictures. These will really horrify people. They'll get ratings, but yeah, I think
they have to compete with the alligator that ate that poor child.
Look at all the coverage that got.
Iconography of alligators.
Well, in Disneyland, having your child eaten at Disneyland, that's
sobering. That is sobering.
That is a ratings driver.
If you take all this stuff archetypally, that is heavy. But to back to your point, yes, it is very. Was an unheard of powerful rainfall that didn't even have a name, as you say. So it didn't have a name, so we can't, personify it as some evil entity with a name.
Or categorize it, yeah.
Yeah.
And actually, what was interesting, which is another reason, maybe because I'm a science geek, that I can't just believe the science of the storm. They've never seen one like that. And the way that it was able to suck water up and then head west. We've never, like I said, we were making Andy turn the computer upside down because storms never go west from that area. And so, it was, and then we're talking about how it was basically an orphan storm too, because it formed a hurricane basically over Louisiana, and it was headed west, which nobody was expecting in their homes, and then just sat there because there was nothing else to move it.
If it had the name, Robin or something, or just a name. So
or Mary Paul. Mary Paul.
Remember that Mary Paul disaster? No, I have to say, the flooding in Baton Rouge, Louisiana.
But
okay.
Oh, I was just going to say, Sally, and you are right. I've seen surveys that say that the top 3 beloved cities people internationally like to visit in America are San Francisco, New Orleans, and New York. And that
exactly.
we forget how
it's like talking about Beyonce as a city. It really, really is. This city is a star. And you also, don't forget, had Ray Nagin's impassioned plea, which at that time, now, that might not even be such a big deal because we're so numbed by, all the speeches and everything that's so... It's just because of social networking, and maybe it still would have been deemed as powerful. Where Ray Nagin made this plea, and I remember at the time my then husband playing it. He said, "You've got to hear what Ray Nagin said," and it kind of went viral. And it was a very powerful thing he did. And then, of course, later he was found to be somewhat ineffectual and even crooked and so forth. But that was later. The other thing I'm very concerned about is what's going to happen. Oh, my dog is going to bark, everybody. Eric.
He is upset about the coverage,
Camilla.
too. There she is.
Sorry about that. She always has to chime in, apparently, when I call. Let's talk. But I'm just very concerned about the aftermath, because the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina was a real hot mess in terms of, carpetbagging and, political, cronyism, and just it was. And also, you guys were talking about how the African American population is lessened, and a lot of people couldn't come back. They couldn't. I mean, now everyone's sort of priced out of New Orleans.
That's
New
right.
Orleans has-
Property values went up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, many of us felt like this was an opportunity. They wanted to get the African Americans out of New
there.
Orleans and gentrify it and make it New Orleans Disneyland with gators.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's really, really, it has really, really shifted and changed.
You know, Sally, I just
It's
want to
not
go back
likely
to the.
happen
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
there. Go ahead.
I just, I think you made a really good point when you said, you know, a lot of people just cannot get their arms around it. You know, instead of everything being on corporate media and the oil companies, people are really struggling with accepting and getting their arms around what's really going on. It reminds me a lot of what's going on in Fukushima, also, that nobody talks about, that is worse than it's ever been. And people don't want to touch it because they feel they can't do anything about it, and it's so horrendous. But, you know, these things need to be addressed.
And it's not sexy.
Yeah,
No.
exactly.
And, you know,
Horrifying.
So, Sally, when you're
Unless
talking
you're into
about
horrifying is sexy.
Really horrifying.
or talking about the aftermath, I mean, these were, if you saw the pictures, much of it was upper middle class suburbs. There were nice houses. They were, you know, it was very expensive neighborhoods surrounding Baton Rouge, and so, you know, it'll be interesting to see but these people do not have flood insurance. So even if you own a very expensive fancy McMansion in a fancy suburb and you have no flood insurance, you know, is the federal government going to bail out people who, you know, are making six figures and are upper middle class? That's not all there was, but there was a lot of that too. So it was very interesting seeing there was a much larger impact on it because it happened so fast. The elite, the more elite, wealthier white community was in just as big a trouble, you know, because so much time with global warming and climate change, the areas that really get it badly are the areas where people are very poor and distressed.
And, you know, it's surprising there wasn't more media coverage because of that alone.
So, Sally, what do you think about that, or about, you know, the kinds of people that have been displaced?
I was thinking, not really having... I mean, I read a little about, that there were some upper middle class suburbs and so forth that were hit, but I think it was such a big swath that maybe also I was thinking a lot of rural poor.
Yes.
Must have been hit. And the issue of mold is a big deal. I remember when Katrina came and went, my son was applying to colleges, and I wanted him to go to...
Tulane.
Has the jazz program.
Yeah, Tulane.
And I wanted him to apply, and then I thought, wait a minute. New Orleans is probably full of mold, like the entire city.
But it always has been.
Yeah, true, but worse now.
Yes,
and then I thought, oh, never mind, and so I didn't encourage him to apply there. But I'm just thinking about the general health of people as they get their homes rebuilt, because everything's going to have to be rebuilt.
Yeah, it'll be awful.
Well, you know, we're about out of time. So, Sally, thank you for calling in and sharing your thoughts. And I know how well you know that area, so I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for allowing me to be the blowhard.
We loved it.
Thank you, Camilla.
Thank you.
And I want to thank all of our listeners and our callers today for your participation, even if it was mental telepathy. I hope you'll turn in every Thursday at 11, because your voice really does matter.
Yes, and KWMR, of course, does not take a stand on any of the issues discussed on Let's Talk. Opinions expressed on this program are those of the hosts and callers and don't necessarily reflect the views of KWMR, its board of directors, underwriters, or members. Next week, we'll be discussing, I think I'm going to discuss the U.S. military next week. There's a nice little topic to wrap your arms around, sink your teeth into. Is it time to re-examine our commitment to war everywhere and the size of the military and the billions of dollars that just went missing that they were talking about? We hope you'll tune in then and join another lively discussion.